Welcome, I'm Martin Cross and I want us to learn how to eat. I've been making this series of videos to explain what it is I'm trying to do. In a sentence, I'm trying to replace the good, bad, fast food paradigm with a paradigm of eating for taste based on the three primary flavours of sweet, sour and cream. Let's call it lean food. Now, it's difficult to explain taste, or a taste like cream, if this idea is completely new to you. So today, let me start by replacing the good, bad, fast paradigm with an intermediary. Something between the cliches of good, bad, fast and the all-encompassing revolutionary idea of three dimensions of flavour that I've been proposing. This interim is the Rhode Violin Church paradigm. Why a church? Well, instead of good food versus bad food, where your body is kind of a theme park, I'm going to talk to you about your body as a church and eating for taste as attending church. Then also a road. So instead of childish and, to my mind, puerile ideas of healthy and unhealthy food, I will talk about the journey, the road you must follow for the rest of your life, as I, at my advanced age, who writes this stuff? Oh, that's right, I do. At my advanced age, I still follow this road right now to pursue the principles of eating for taste. And finally, a violin. Thus, instead of easy fast food versus slow, time-consuming and difficult recipes, I'm going to talk about the art of eating for taste, as a violin is a representative of a work of art. Take the church or temple. You've heard the phrase, "My religion is football," I'm sure. But as we all know, that's not really a religion. It's really a personal choice. If you say, "My religion is the Arsenal," for instance, what is often being really said is that religion offers me personally nothing more than I get from the enjoyment of following my favourite football team on a Saturday. Well, in the same way, eating chocolate and ice cream and crisps is not a result of your body's secret cravings for bad food. It's really a choice that says, I'm as happy to treat my body as a theme park as I would be treating it as a temple. Yet your body is the product of more than 4 million years of evolution since apes first stepped down from the trees and started walking toward what would become our farms. Your body is really far more like a mysterious temple than it is anything as money-driven as Disney World. Even more so with the world's food that is available for us to eat. Did you know that 99% of plant life is completely inedible? As Wikipedia points out, there are many types of bitter almond tree and only one type of sweet. Someone had to work this out by trial and error and then start cultivating the sweet almond tree so that you and I could have marzipan and almond fingers. Yet we're being told by those who themselves don't want to have to think about it that there is good food and there is bad food. Aren't these the same types of people who used to love to tell us how bad witches were? But you do not have to believe me, thankfully. All you need is the patience and open-mindedness to embrace lean food. There is a handy catchphrase that goes with lean food, but it isn't remotely patronising, and it certainly isn't nanny knows best. It is this: diet by eating more of what you like, not more of what you don't like. Notice the key thing here, the inflection. It doesn't show when you write it down. Diet by eating more of what you like, not more of what you don't like. Except the inflection isn't here. The inflection is, or should be, here. You should say it and write it like this: diet by eating more of what you like, not more of what you don't like. It's a very, very simple principle. So why do the witch hunters avoid saying this at all costs? It is because it is about you and your knowledge, and not them and their knowledge. It is not about science. So that is where you need to bring your offering to the temple with patience and effort to find out what you personally like. You can use trial and error, or you can use a more systematic method. But either way, it should take years, decades of regular attendance at the temple. And if that seems uphill at times, as is only natural, just remember this: there are no points, nil point, for finding out what you don't like. You need patience because it isn't overnight. And this brings me to the second of the three parts of this paradigm, the road. We have fully embraced the idea of healthy food, but what have we lost in doing so? The problem for me, for us, is that eating for taste is healthy eating, but healthy eating has such a bad name that's actually a disadvantage. Take 5 a day for an example. Well, if you eat for taste, you'll end up eating way more than 5 bits of fruit, pieces of fruit per day. I'm willing to make a bet. This is only because fruits combine cooperatively, stroke competitively, with each other as infinitely as vegetables do. If you were offered a vegetable salad, you would rightly ask, what vegetables are in this salad? Would you not? Well, if you're eating for taste, you're certainly going to end up doing exactly the same thing with a fruit salad. 5 a day is a way of avoiding having to think about the taste of fruit. Would I go around chewing on a leek because I had been told to eat 5 veg a day? But I see people doing just that with fruit. Worse, the actual effect of 5 a day is to contribute to obesity. If the message comes across as just eat 5 a day, but in addition to all your other eating, then what it does is getting people eating more, consuming more. Believe me, the message is working, but at what price? Just look at the figures for obesity. As an instance, I don't often eat chocolate, and I think people are quite quick to declare, he is doing healthy eating. But if I were asked, that wouldn't be my reason. If asked, I would say, I enjoy chocolate when I'm given it, but I don't buy it for myself because I'm a grown up. I no longer eat sweets of most kinds, but I sure did when I was a kid, and thank God for them. There is no easy way for anyone, including me, to find out what I like, as much as other people like chocolate or crisps. To get to the temple, there are many roads you can follow, including the circular ones. One of the pitfalls of modern life is that liking the food everyone else likes makes you feel like you belong. When you eat a burger with a mate, you can draw together over how great or not as great as it is. When you eat chocolate, you're one of the many, many people who appreciate this simple reward for one's hard efforts in life. And when you get a bargain from the supermarket of good quality for a low price, you know it's a bargain because everyone needs money. For good or ill, you might say I'm on an overgrown and muddy path while most people are on the M25. But let's call a spade a spade. With all these huge and extremely well established pressures on you and other individuals to conform to current eating habits, you're unlikely to embrace my theory. Very likely I am only embracing my theory because it is mine, people will say. It's all very well for one or two individuals to step off the M25 and establish a spur into new territory, but that won't really change things, will it? Well, I'm not going to lecture you or anyone here about the moral hazards of factory farming. Instead, I'm going to talk about the genius of art and Stradivarius. In fairness to me, there is something I have had to give up to pursue my theories, and it is something you very likely might have. My theory has made me creative in the artistic sense, pushing me to write, to publish, to make videos, and all kinds of graphics in pursuit of my goal. What you have that I do not have could be the reason for someone else to do the same for people like you, if not you yourself. Your body is a temple, but your child's body is a Stradivarius. It is a work of art. You know about Stradivarius, I'm sure. It was said that the varnish on the violins he made was the secret of their superior sound. For years it was thought he might have had a secret cocktail of oils and polishes that he evolved magically over years of experiment or something. It was a great story until a few years ago it got spoiled, and the latest thinking is that it is the shape of the wood rather than the finish of it that is the result of the remarkable sound. Either way, it's a great analogy. A child's body is a precision instrument. Whether for sport or dance, it is as playable as a Strad. The art that goes into making this Strad starts early, maybe much earlier than you think. You might know this if you've ever been pregnant. Your body knows what it needs. Your mind does not. That is why you get cravings for the oddest foods, peanut butter and custard. It's called pica. And it's kids that are losing out most in this world of overconsumption and may continue to lose out even more if global warming takes its hold. On October the 18th, 2018, the Guardian headline was "Huge reduction in meat eating essential to avoid climate breakdown." You can Google for it. For what it is that is sinister about the good, bad fast food paradigm is that it hides a culture of chemicals. Don't forget, chocolate is fundamentally a chemical. It is extremely cheap to make, unlike anything that has to be grown. It's loaded with the great luxury chemical of the last 500 years, which is now so cheap: white refined sugar. The processed food they want to sell us is primarily rich, not lean. Often it is loaded with both sugar and salt. How confusing to one's sense of taste to eat something that looks savoury, tastes salty, and yet fuels you up like chocolate. I most certainly do have and advocate biscuits and cakes. This is because there is not bad food. There is good food and better food. By all means, eat what you enjoy. If you need to advise your children, then remind them to diet by eating more of what they like, not more of what they don't like. And it might be even better if you can show them. Fast food is the most wonderful time and effort saver, but what is the time and effort being saved for? To watch more TV? To watch more TV about other people's cooking and eating? I'm not being funny. The popularity of those shows tells you how much people want to know more. We know instinctively something's wrong. It would obviously be wrong to treat a Strad like a stylophone. A stylophone was a cheap throwaway synthesizer. You just had to put batteries into it. Some people want to treat food the same way. Some dieters or bodybuilders replace their meals with a protein shake. That's an extreme, but many of us do eat to feel full. And when you're eating that way, you're always on a thin line between too many calories. Thinking your body somehow ever needs fuel is wrong-headed, if not actually damaging. Fasting is good for the body. You need to follow basic nutrition, which, as we all know, is a combination of things. From then on, you can eat purely for fun. You can eat anything that makes you feel good. What is really fun is to love having eaten as much as eating. Stay lean and have a body that suits you like a Stradivarius suits a violinist. Try it. Actually, it can be fun to let yourself go hungry. In a nutshell, we are replacing the good, bad, fast paradigm with a road, violin, church paradigm based on the science of taste, using the 3 dimensions of flavour that everybody already knows all about. So, what is the opposite of lean food? What name can we give this good, bad, fast paradigm that I think is wrong more than it is unhealthy? Well, after some thought, I believe it is really eating for richness. It's not that rich food is unhealthy per se, it is that eating for richness is decadent, lazy, and wrong-headed, and can only ever work in the short term. After that, it brings ever diminishing returns. One eats more and more with predictable results, as if one was tracked on a circular road. Show your children that it isn't the food you eat that is healthy or unhealthy. It is your relationship to food that is healthy or unhealthy. That is not the same thing at all. In fact, anything else is blaming the food. Tell your friends. Hello and welcome to this time of Eating for Taste with 3 recipes. I'm going to show you 2 recipes for savoury and 1 for dessert. And the savoury recipes, this time, I'm not doing recipes with meat, generally speaking. The most I've allowed is fish at the lower end of the scale. Up until now, it's all been vegetables. Today I'm going to show a variation, which is using offal. So again, the principle is the lower end of the scale of meat. So kidney, liver, and I've got a recipe for haggis. For the dessert, I'm going to be combining my own recipe with somebody else's recipe, and that's to show that I do use other people's recipes and have always used other people's recipes as the basis for experimentation. From the next video onwards, I'm going to be finishing this series with 3-course meals. So I'm going to do a starter, a main and a dessert, and the idea is that these are meals which I have served to my guests. So they're a level of effort and hopefully reward above what I've been doing so far, and that'll draw this work to a close for this first series. Okay, so sometimes you're eating for taste and you get a bit of a yen for a cheeseburger or a kebab or a pizza or whatever. And you know that whilst you'll enjoy eating it at the time, you'll pay for it afterwards. It'll lie heavy on your gut. You won't be proud of yourself. It's not a holistic experience. So how do we counter that with our theory? The first recipe I'm going to show you is a cheeseburger, but obviously a cheeseburger with a difference. So I'm going to use toast instead of a burger bun. I'm going to use as my meat of choice. So this isn't a compromise. This is the best of the whole range of meat, including, in my opinion, the higher, so to speak, meats, lamb, chicken, etc., etc. I'm going to use some pig's liver. So here I've got some freshly cooked pieces of pig's liver, and I'm going to slice these up to be a bit more manageable. Like so, and you can see that these pieces of liver aren't bloody in the middle. they are very slightly pink. So we're trying to avoid that rubbery texture, which is so familiar to us from overcooked liver. Now, I don't need a tremendous amount, but I can use as much as I like, because this is comfort food. This is meant to be filling. This is meant to fill you up. So whilst there's just enough there already to make this very enjoyable, I'm just going to add a little bit extra, a little dash of luxury in that extra. So I can put that back neatly to have later. Since there's plenty for seconds. And the cheese I'm combining this with is some lovely, not cheap, but the liver is very, very inexpensive, of course. So there's plenty in the budget for some quality Stilton. You'll have had this kind of slab of fresh Stilton, I'm sure, when you've had a ploughman's out in the town, and it's a hugely enjoyable thing. A simple ploughman's with good fresh salad, pickled onion pickle, good bread. And I could easily have done a ploughman's here as my version for you, but I do think the very simple combination, and I'm getting liver because I'm using the same service, I'm getting liver blood all over this Stilton, so I would want to bear that in mind if I was using it elsewhere. Now, if I had been cooking this meal for the first time, obviously the liver would still be hot, and the Stilton and the toast would be freshly made, and the Stilton would melt very appealingly over that to make a delicious meal that's ready to serve immediately. So really, far less effort than a ploughman's, and in my opinion, the combination of Stilton and liver is probably one of the best combinations I've discovered by my process of experimentation. I really, really do think that is a great pairing. And if I buy liver, there's going to be enough for more than one time of having it. So the second time, the liver's going to be cold. The toast will be freshly made, obviously, but the liver will probably be cold. So what I will do is I will finish that off in the microwave, and I do have a microwave here. So that's going to microwave quite quickly. So I will probably do that in 30-second bursts until it reaches the point where I'm happy with it. So let's do that now. So there we have the freshly microwaved for just 30 seconds Stilton on the liver, steaming appetizingly away. I'm actually going to have a bite of that now while I'm ready, and enjoy. Oh yeah, that's good. What I'm going to do now is the dessert, which is from this book, River Cottage Fruit, which was actually a gift to me. And I saw this, it caught my eye. I thought it would be interesting to experiment with trying to make that and combine it with the rice pudding, my version of rice pudding, which I've done previously. So I'm just going to follow through these instructions in front of you. The first, to outline in briefly what the recipe says to do, is to thinly slice the rhubarb, a small amount of rhubarb, put the pith, so some of the skin, in from the orange and the orange segments in, create a syrup out of honey, sweetener, sugar if you prefer, honey and flavouring, and then lightly poach the rhubarb in the syrup, so that it's very much al dente, and that's the outcome. So in order to maximise the surface area, the suggestion is to slice the rhubarb slightly on an angle, very thinly. So this is raw rhubarb at the moment, and I'll just slice that up. I have made this once before already, so I ought to know what I'm doing. There. That's 2 full stems thinly sliced, which I think is about right. It says 200 grams in the recipe. The next thing to do is to prepare the orange. So what I want to do is to get some skin from the orange. So I'll cut off quite thinly a few generous slices of skin, and the recipe says from about half the orange. So I don't need a huge amount. That's probably a bit less than I'm advised, but I think that's plenty for my taste. And then I'm going to cut that up nice and thinly, so it's a subtle ingredient. That'll do. And that can go in on top of the rhubarb, ready for the syrup to be added, which will lightly poach it. Now, I've got to prepare the orange itself, and the advice I'm following here does come from the book. So it says the first thing you need to do is to cut off the bottom to make a flat base. Once you've got that, then you've got a stable base to work from, and what you want to do is to cut away the skin and the white to leave just the orange. So it's a fairly aggressive process of cutting, but you can't really go wrong. The worst that can happen is that it gets messy, which is why I've got a tea towel under my board this time. Fine to just cut away the top there, and it's beginning to come good. And then finally cut around my base. And that's all going to be waste. But what I want to do, again according to the instructions, is cut down to release individual segments, which will go into the bowl like so. And I'll do that with the whole orange. Removing any extra pithy parts from the interior. So it's really not too wet a job, not too messy a job. And that's that part of it done. That's that phase done. I've got some juice which has come out of the orange, and I've got some juice from the pith. If I put all of that into the bowl, then the next stage is to make up the syrup. So let me put that to one side. Because I will replace, I'll use the bowl instead of I'll use the bowl as a pan, and I'll microwave it instead of putting it on the hob. But basically what I'm going to do is add to whatever juice I've got in there, I'm going to add water to make it up to 100 ml. I'm going to add water to make it up to 100 ml, and then the ingredients of the syrup are going to be some sugar, except instead of sugar, which is obviously a chemical essentially, I'm going to use organic stevia, which is a natural sweetener, 0 calories if anybody's interested. And it comes in sachets like this. It's essentially a very fine powder, which has become joined together, so it's like a salt tablet or something, but each sachet is the equivalent in sweetness of 2 teaspoons. So that should be a very effective sweetener. And then I'm going to use the best quality honey I can find, because that's so much the key ingredient here. And this is one of the best. It's a Spanish honey, very flavoursome, very aromatic, and very sweet. Quite sweet, but also quite sweet, but also quite light. So not an overpowering sweetness at all. The recipe calls for saffron. I'm actually using turmeric, just a small amount. And then to that, I've got some star aniseed, which is what the recipe specifies, just a couple of those. But I've also got some ouzo or pernod, so some aniseed liqueur. And I'm actually going to use a bit of that, just a small capful, to give it that slightly bitter taste to contrast against all the sweetness. So I'll just top that up with water to the 100 ml mark using my measuring jug, and then I'll microwave it. A quick 30 seconds in the microwave gets that good and hot, as you can feel by touching the bottom and see from the steam coming off it, and it creates a juice that looks just like that. So now that is going to be used to poach the rhubarb lightly. And really, I should have done what I did last time, which is keep the rhubarb separate from the orange, so that the juice really was only covering the rhubarb. However, that looks pretty much what I was hoping for. So I'm going to put that to one side and let that cool now. And then this can go in for cleaning, or rather in for rubbish. Let's make the rice pudding that goes with the orange. So I've got some cooked basmati rice here. Imagine that this is left over from some other meal and I'm looking to use it up. So this is an occasional meal, but one of the things that I really like is to use basmati instead of the usual short grain rice that you use for rice pudding, because I think it gives a lovely crunchy texture to it, quite different to the usual sort of stodginess that you might associate with rice puddings from the past. And I don't do anything remotely clever here. All I do is add, I prefer the creamier milk, so I add a good half a cup or so of milk to it. And the magic ingredient is, of course, a shortbread biscuit. So I could use my pestle and mortar to break this up, to crumble it up, I mean, or I could do it as reasonable sized chunks like I'm doing it now, whichever best suits the dish at the time, your mood, whatever. So I've made a little bit of a mess. That's had the desired effect, that's how I want it to be. Now I can add my special mixture as the fruit highlight to go with the rice pudding. So I'll just make sure I get a combination of pith, orange and rhubarb, as well as syrup. And there we have it. That's rather a pretty dish, which is also quite, obviously with the rice, it's going to be quite filling, it's going to be quite substantial. So that again is ready to serve and enjoy. The only thing I would say is that whilst the idea of the recipe caught my eye, I did think afterwards, it's not one of my all-time favourites, like many of the things that I make are. So this has been a bit of an experience with recipes. I've tried making recipes infrequently throughout years, both before changing the way I ate to what it is now, and afterwards. And some recipes make the grade, but to be honest, most don't. and you don't come away feeling, I'm looking forward to doing that again, which is the acid test. So I guess that's one of the things that has given me the enthusiasm to start eating for taste, but even more than that, the enthusiasm to keep eating for taste, and to offer my friends and strangers the product of that path of experimentation. Even though it's to my preference, I think there's some value to showing what the results of even my preference are. The last on the list is haggis. Now, I do hope you'll forgive me. Since I'm short of time, I'm going to show the idea more than the presentation this time, because it is so simple. So I'm going to take a bowl, and then I'm going to take a haggis that's been pre-made. I wouldn't even begin to try and make haggis myself, but I assume you've had I assume you've had neeps and tatties with your haggis in the past, a la a typical Burns night, and I assume that you've enjoyed that as I have. I do like haggis. I like the creamy, savoury nature of it. So that's what a haggis looks like, and that will microwave perfectly happily. That's a perfectly good way to cook haggis. So where I'm not short of time, I would now microwave that, crumble it up. There's more than one serving obviously in there. So again, this is a substantial comfort food. I think it's delicious. I think the meal is delicious, and I think it's something that will completely slake your hunger. Now, the key thing about haggis, to my mind, is what to serve it with. Potatoes are essentially waxy and creamy themselves, so it seems very obvious to me not to try and serve haggis with potatoes when I'm doing it for my own taste. And in fact, when I've experimented, I've found that rice is a remarkably good accompaniment to haggis, because it's sort of dry and nutty. It's a very clean complement to the creamy, savoury taste of the haggis. So I would suggest that the key thing about doing your own haggis at home is to have it with rice, the way that I am here. What I would add to that, I would add peas, and I would add peas rather than parsnips or swede or turnip or anything like that, because peas are quite sweet. They go very well with rice as a contrast. They're a very kind of clean taste, so again they will contrast well with the haggis, and I think that's an excellent pairing to combine the vegetables with the starch and the highlight. I flesh out the peas with a further pulse. Don't forget there's more than one serving here, and therefore it's fine to use half a can of peas rather than the whole can, and then mix them with half a can of beans. I've favoured white kidney beans here, which are less flavoursome perhaps than red kidney beans, but in a way that's what works. I don't want to overpower or compete with the haggis, so that's a good partner to go with these other ingredients. And then the final thing that I might add is just a small amount of sweet potato. So I would just microwave, a sweet potato. I wouldn't even peel it. And then I would just dice maybe 3 or 4 cubes from that sweet potato and combine that, not because it needs extra starches, but just as a contrast against the main starch. so that you can form your own opinion about the advantages of one against another. If the rice really doesn't work for you, then you'll be looking for another alternative that isn't creamy. But I think that absolutely ticks all the boxes. And then the final element is this. And what this is kale. And what I've done with this is I've put it into the oven for about 15 minutes and it's made it very crispy. And I've just sprayed it very lightly with oil and grated a bit of salt over it. And that just provides a clean, savoury alternative to the spicy, savoury haggis. So it's the combination of all those together that I think works so well in this one particular variation of haggis. So there you have three dishes for this time round. Two offal dishes and one dessert dish, which is sweet but doesn't have sugar in it. So this is the kind of food that not only is good to eat at the time, but it feels great to have eaten it afterwards, and that's what we want. Hi, and in this Teach or Learn with me, I'd like to talk a little bit about the territory that we're trying to explore. So, for example, Edward de Bono, a very interesting original thinker, talks about how do you map an unknown territory. Imagine a person turning up on an island that they've got no map to, and they're trying to describe it to somebody who's never seen it. Well, the first thing they might do is start by facing towards the land from the sea. Look ahead and describe what you see. Turn to the right and describe what you see. Turn to the left and describe what you see. So de Bono's idea is that directions are a good way to start to explore a completely unknown space and try and take a territory which could consist of anything from the highest mountain to the lowest valley to the deepest river, and try and produce a map of it. And that's really what I want to talk about here, a map of taste. Now that we've gone a fair way into the interior of taste, it's appropriate to see where we are and see if we can tell where we're going. We've got de Bono's idea. Another approach, completely different approach, is of course to use descriptive words, like I just used: river, mountain, valley. We have those words for food. In fact, I've relied very heavily on three key ones from my choice: sweet, cream and salt. I've got some other, if I was addressing a group, I could do that cliche of a whiteboard and you could call out words. Cutting to the chase, I've already assembled a selection of words which I'm sure you'll recognise. So we've got fresh tasting, we've got flowery, we've got plain, sour, cold, smoky, spicy, hot, rich of course, strong, nutty, dry, mild. Those were just the ones off the top of my head. So a completely different way of mapping our space would be to try to assign those words to large areas, so that we would have a range of mountains might be our selection of plain tastes, or a river might be a selection of strong tastes that you can't mix. I'm being very imaginative. So let's look at a couple of possibilities, see where we get, and then, if we can, make some closing remarks and try and end up with a conclusion. One way I've considered thinking about taste is I've wondered whether richness is a type of creaminess, whether the fundamental taste of cream as opposed to sweet versus sour also encompasses that group of tastes that we call richness, that we describe as richness. So most people are not concerned to explore sweet and sour in their own right, and therefore have wondered if they are limiting themselves to a range of rich tastes and missing out on the other half or 2/3 even of tastes that are available to them. Now, if I was to try and draw that as a map, I might try and split the territory into two and have rich as opposed to obviously not rich, not rich more than anything else, and that would then divide up into sweet versus sour. So I'm not concerned to divide rich up into sweet and sour, because, for example, if you think of about a typical English roast dinner on a Sunday, what you tend to have there is a lot of rich tastes, which is the lamb or the beef or the pork or the chicken that you've cooked as the centerpiece of the meal that everybody likes. And then, to avoid competing with that taste, you would have a lot of plain tastes, which is plain boiled peas, plain boiled carrots, plain potatoes or roasted potatoes, or chips, very plain tasting things. You're trying to use subdued flavors, not enhanced flavors. There's a whole history of eating richly that goes right back to mixing multiple meats, to mixing meats with fruits. It's a little bit decadent for my taste. I know that my taste is more is less hedonistic than that, so that wouldn't be of interest to me, but I can understand it being of interest to other people and why it's been such a part of history. However, what we don't want to do is go backwards. What we want to do is go forwards, and the opportunity to go forwards is if it was the case that the centre of taste was wrongly placed in the middle of this territory. What we would want to do going forward is to move that back to the true centre of the whole territory, which would be here, where we would expand out. So we would still include richness, but we would also include sweetness and sourness. So if I was to put that in terms of a question mark, are we overemphasizing this? Then if we were, we would be better off moving back to here. The not rich taste is fundamentally the mild or plain taste from our words list. So that would be the description of this, as it were, dividing line. So that a roast dinner is an example of where we tend to lean towards mixing rich with mild and plain, and that doesn't take us into this area. My two caveats about this, my dual reservation about this, is that it's an assumption a little bit that rich is a variant of creaminess and not a variant of the whole thing. My starting point was not really that. My starting point was that richness was a word for the mixture of all the tastes, and I still like that. I still think that's a good way to think of it. I don't like the idea that the theory of taste requires us to assume that other people were less clever than us or didn't know as much as us or whatever. So I don't particularly want to end up thinking that everybody's been eating wrong. I do think there's an element of that, but I think it's something that one can only really identify as being a weakness, a failing, at the point where within my lifetime really, where we've gone from the non-supermarket, highly limited, highly localized diet to the supermarket, worldwide produce, highly complex and diminishing returns of modern recipes and recipe books. So that's a possibility which I have considered, but it's not my favoured possibility. It's not the most likely possibility to my way of thinking. Next time we do a learn with me in the next video that I make, we'll look at a completely different alternative to the one that I've just discussed. I want to finish this learn with me by coming back to what I started off saying about Edward de Bono's approach of mapping an unknown space by directions. Now, obviously, the sense that he was describing, the primary sense that he was describing using, was the sense of sight. Well, we don't have that sense. We have the sense of taste. However, to some extent, what I've been proposing has been something similar to an approach based on direction, using the diagrams that I've put forward, which arrange foods along a dimension. So there's an advantage, I think, in pulling out of a wide range of similar foods, the ones that engage one's curiosity, that reflect one's own personal taste, and that's what I've done. And the advantage of doing that is, for example, what I haven't done publicly, as it were, so what I haven't done as part of a learn with me, is what I have done when I've been designing combinations of foods that I thought would appeal to me and to people with a similar sense of taste to me, and also show those with a different sense of taste to me how they might do the same thing. And the idea was, if you take a range of similar items and you find that most are one thing but one is another, then the otherness is a point at which you can take a right turn or a left turn instead of going straight ahead. In other words, if we have the idea of 3 dimensions. So horizontal, vertical, and then the third forward, backward, however you want to describe a dimension. Then if we're going along a savoury axis and we find something that's sweet, well, that's a point at which we can pursue the sweet axis. So if we've got elements arranged along a line of similar items, we can substitute one item for another item, and that allows us to position in our memory of taste, in our sense of taste, in our understanding of taste. It allows us to position elements that we can then combine, a bit like the way you mix a colour. It's less like composing music than it is mixing the colours for a picture. And there's a reason for that, which we'll come on to in due course. But first of all, let's get where we're going, and let's continue with this teach next time and look at where I've got with a complete alternative to what I've been discussing that builds on both of them. So I hope you'll join me then.